with it.
No,
Your security limitation.
No.
That's what I'm doing.
this conversation right now is, I think, the conversation every CISO has with their, like, whatever other part in the organization. They're like, no, you need that security. It's not going to be a problem. And you're like, no, it's going to be a big problem. I'm going to die. Time. This is an idea that I almost started my own startup company for, and I'm quite excited. And I want to start with two companies that I want to show you here. Tom, if you can please share my screen. The first one is Talon. The second one is Island. They're both competitors, direct competitors. They say the following thing. They say the browser is a crazy space security-wise. Most of the problems that you have today in organizations security-wise come from the browser. So you like download a bad file or whatever. And they said, let's create a secure browser for the enterprise. So they patch this like browser that's very secure, and it's a lot harder to have security problems. And they said, let's use that. Talon got sold for a nice hefty sum of $625 million to Palo Alto Networks. And I'm sure we both would love that. And the second company is also doing really good. So this got me thinking about an analogy. Maybe there is something that we can use here in this idea. They said the biggest application that you're using in like the organization is the browser. And I said, what is the second, third, fourth most used application? Maybe we can apply the same concept there, right? The security problem of that in the second place. I think the second place is email. That's my thought. I think a lot of people use Outlook and all that stuff, right? But what's the third?
That maybe, so I get what you're saying, and I think webmail is now a big thing. So maybe not on like Google using applications, but Google using organizations. But keep in mind that most of the world is probably still using Microsoft, right? So I will counter what you said by giving another analogy, if you don't mind. I feel like when you look at the time spent on applications on the phone or on a desktop of a general person, the number one professions that use dedicated pieces of software that might take up more space time, like more screen time than other applications, are engineers. And we're talking about software engineers. My dad's a mechanical engineer. His desktop screen is always up on SolidWorks. It's the tool of your trade. And I think that for digital workers, and especially engineers in the modern workforce, that application, whatever it may be, kind of rings the bell, right? That's the one thing that you use maybe even more than a browser, depending on what you do.
And at the end of the day, we're developers, and this cast is also kind of for developers. So the first thing that popped into my mind after emails is the IDE. And I said, why isn't there like a secure IDE for enterprises? And that's this episode's idea. So I want to show you a few things. The first thing I want to show you is what I found, right? What are the solutions out there? So the first one is this. I worked in Palo Alto Networks, so I know these guys. They created like a security plugin for the IDE, and it checks your code, but it's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about creating an IDE itself that's secure and not just like one aspect, which is the coding aspect. The second thing I want to show you is this thing, which is we're having a lot of malicious VS Code extensions coming up right now. This is like this got into over 100 organizations. Pretty crazy. A Dracula theme or whatever. You can stop the share. And the problem is getting bigger. Like people are starting to notice that extensions and the IDE is a big attack surface. So Tom, what did you find? I kind of gave you this idea beforehand, and I told you to research it for a bit.
So I feel like you are suggesting that you give me all those in this cast just for the general public. This is not entirely false. So it's okay that you do that, and I love you and thank you very much for like being a friend. Anyways, biggest thing that I thought of immediately when you said securing the IDE was extension. That was the thing that kind of popped into my mind. And the reason for that is the same reason that we have antiviruses, the Kaspersky's of the world, right? Is you download something from somewhere and you don't really know the source, you don't really know what's inside of it. You're not going to read like open a hex editor and start reading the binary code, right? It's not the way the world works. So instead you have virus detectors, like again, antivirus software like Kaspersky. Why don't we have the exact same thing for IDE extension? It's basically the same idea. You download something from somewhere, right? It's usually like a reputable source, like the marketplace for like Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ or whatever, right? JetBrains. But still, it's just a bunch of code somebody wrote and uploaded to the platform. I had plugins listed on the platform, on the marketplace. It's not that hard to do.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, right. And I feel like personally, I am very careful about what I download into my machines, especially if it's a work machine, especially if it's an extension for a developer who I don't know. So these guys came up with the best name ever, Extension Total, which of course is a homage to Virus Total, which is an antivirus software. And they do exactly that. They have this thing that actually looks over the specific extensions that you want to download, and then it essentially blocks them midway if they're supposedly malicious. This is exactly the example you gave, by the way, the Dracula theme one. And I think this is a very good example of what we can do to block stuff on a major attack vector inside the IDE, which is extension. The problem here, from my perspective, is that they're not really solving the general problem, right? They're solving the local problem of your machine and protecting your IDE directly. But once that extension is in, if you haven't blocked it, it's there. It's doing very bad shit with your code and with your permissions. How do you solve for that problem, in your opinion? Once the extension is already there, how do you make sure to kick it out?
Okay, so there are a few things here. We're talking about preventative and like dealing with an ongoing situation. I would say this. Their idea is the right way. I would also start that way. I would start with like this extension total thing and create an extension, like a secure IDE later. Let's talk about what this secure IDE is, how I see it. The way I would do it is this. VS Code is open source. Fork the code, change all of the security configuration defaults to be a lot more restrictive, create like an admin panel for the security team or the VP R&D to see what's going on in all of their organization's IDEs, right? So they need to have some visibility on what extensions are there, whatever. And add some basic code to check that they're not running anything crazy in the terminal, right? Because you can also copy paste code from the internet and run it in the terminal there. So just creating that, I think that could be easily $100-200 million exit company that would also be sold to Palo Alto Networks.
You're very easy on giving valuations to random ideas. Like, oh, sure, I could sell that for $100 million. Oh, cool.
Let's check this. Let's check this idea in 1, 2, 3 years and see if somebody sells something like that for that amount, okay?
And just to clarify, I'm not against saying, I'm with you. Like, cyber companies sell for a shitload of money for reasons that are beyond my understanding as well. It's okay. But having worked with quite a few kind of companies in this space, I get what you're saying. I feel like you're trying to put an idea into place that will scare enough people so they'll buy the thing for the organization. I totally get it. My main qualm with what you have, my main kind of consideration is you're talking about extensions. That's the main thing you're doing. An enterprise IDE browser that is about extensions. What about all the other stuff that might happen?
No, I just said some stuff that's not just extensions. I talked about what if you pay some stuff to the terminal inside the IDE.
I understand.
Right?
I understand. You're right. Like beware of prompt injections that might help with like AI coding assistance.
Yeah, like create a more secure IDE, because right now it's just the Wild West. I can do whatever I want in my IDE.
Right, but I'll kind of counter that by saying that I think you're missing the larger point of play, which is if you get, and I think that's how kind of the enterprise browser companies of the world, work like. I assume you have now an application that you control inside the ecosystem of those organizations. In a normal application like a browser, there's so much you can do with the user, right? They're expecting to open tabs and have a bunch of stuff. They're not really expecting it to have like its own dedicated application suite. In the IDE, you can essentially become a de facto standard for whatever it is that you want to do for developers. A concrete example. If you have an enterprise IDE for developers, you can be the CI/CD platform of choice. You can be the thing that links your code, like the super linter of choice. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because in my experience, you will lose the enterprise IDE war unless you can create amazing developer experience. And the holy grail of developer experience is these processes that are distributed across many different places, many different tools. And that's what I really want you to focus on. The security aspect is one thing, but what about all of the other stuff an enterprise IDE lets you do?
Totally disagree. I think that if you're using VS Code already has the developer experience. People want to use their own extensions, their own things their Vim extensions, whatever their configuration. You just want to make sure that they're using it securely. And organizations care about that. That's an attack vector, this IDE surface. and they just want to make sure it's secure. You're not dealing with the developer experience. You're not dealing with creating a big suite. You can, but I think if you just focus on the security aspect, you can create a big company from that. Create some kind of dashboard to see what's going on all the IDs in the organization.
I completely disagree, because you're assuming that you're going to get companies to get the developers to install an ID solely on the security aspects of it.
No, but it's going to be installed before they even... It's going to be installed company-wide. It's not going to be their choice.
So you have code spaces and like the GitHub, Gitpod, whatever of the works.
No, it's not going to be online. It's going to be on their computer. It doesn't work well online.
Fine. So disregard the whole online IDE thing.
Yeah.
Fine. But I don't think you're going to win based on... I can't imagine a CTO approving the installation of an IDE browser solely on the fact of security.
Why browser?
Sorry, IDE. Sorry, I can't imagine a CTO or a VP R&D.
It happened in a few companies I've been to. They said, okay, now we're using VS Code, and we all changed to VS.
But that's not an enterprise ID. That's an open
but
source,
if you
very
use,
popular.
it's gonna look like VS Code. It's just gonna have more security measures in place, but it's still gonna be VS Code.
I have no idea why people would buy a hardened version of VS Code.
If you're a big organization, why would you buy Island or Talon? It's the same thing. Why would you want a different Chrome browser?
You would buy JetBrains. That's exactly what you would do. You would buy JetBrains. You would buy
JetBrains isn't secure. That's what I'm saying.
I'm not saying that JetBrains is more secure than VS Code. What I'm saying is that if you're going to buy an enterprise ID, a piece of software as an enterprise ID, and that you've reached the point where you feel like you want to buy an enterprise ID, which is a whole value proposition that we need to talk about, right? But let's assume that you got there. And let's assume that you got there based on security alone, which is what you're offering. It's not going to stick. Developers are not going to use it. They're going to complain, and you need some sugar for it.
Why are developers going to complain? Are you not happy with VS Code right now? Imagine you just have VS Code working the same way you're used to.
But it's not going to work the same way.
It will.
Because you have all of those limitations that you put on me.
But you're going to put limitations in a smart way so it still feels normal.
So you're going back to what I'm saying, which is adding a great developer experience to the product. We're just disagreeing on what the great developer experience
I'm just saying that you don't need to bring the developer experience. VS Code is already doing that for you.
And you're fucking with it.
No.
Your security limitation. No. That's what you're doing.
This conversation right now is, I think, the conversation every CISO has with their, like, whatever other part in the organization. They're like, no, you need that security. It's not going to be a problem. And you're like, no, it's going to be a big problem. I'm going to die. Yeah.
No, but I think
I understand. I think I understand what you're saying. Tell me if it's true. You're saying It's not enough to just say, let's add security to VS Code. It might even hinder the experience. You need to create the best suite for that. So you need to create like a full ecosystem for the whole thing. So you have more values to bring that into their organization, like JetBrains is doing.
I'm saying that it's much easier to build an enterprise browser than to build an enterprise ID. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason for that is it's a major problem, right? I'm not degrading in any way the effort that those teams made. But I'm saying that a browser is much more generic than an IDE. An IDE is very, very specific. And the reason why VS Code is very good, despite it being a pretty wide range of users thing, is it's a niche application. It's used for coding. A browser is used for a lot of different things. And mainly what you got to do, I think, is to make sure that it applies to the least common denominator of the users. Speed, versatility, I don't know, design, I don't know. I need to think. I have never thought about it. But in the case of an IDE, because it's such a niche used product, right? It's still, developers in the world are still a very small minority of computer users, right? It's much, much harder, in my opinion, to build a great product there without falling into many, many gaps that the VS Code team spent 20 years, or however much time VS Code exists, probably less, to build. And I think that by impugning, by going into those features and trying to fuck them up with security limitations, you will be making one of the most hated products in the history of products. Like, this will be worse. I just saw Shark Tank. This will be worse than the guy who thought it would be a great idea to have hats for bananas, right? There's a guy who thought there should be hats for bananas.
Or it will be the next Nest that they didn't invest in. But let's see. Time will tell.
Right. Did Nest, was Nest on Shark Tank?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
And they didn't invest. That's the crazy part.
And we know how that ended.
Yeah.
But we are 40 minutes into this thing. I want to close it up. And I want to say just one thing before I let you guys go. whenever you hear Agam talk about anything that has to do with IDs, you have to keep in mind two things. First of all, Agam is a developer's developer. He hasn't used it. He's been developing since he was 3 years old and he can hold the keyboard, right? Like that's Agam for you. And the second thing is that I am much more of the cautious voice of the enterprise world in this community. Agam is the dreamer, the developer. I'm the gray-haired, belly-grabbing, all that pocket protector, enterprise business guy, right? That's the relationship between us. So I will continue on giving my shtick. Agam is going to continue on giving his shtick, and you guys are here to enjoy the ride. Thank you.
Let us know if you're running on this idea. Thanks, Tom.
100%.